Welcome to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast, where we bring you the most interesting and enlightening conversations around movement practice and how you can become the most heroic version of yourself through pursuing movement that's relevant to your nature. This is a podcast that's going to feature some of the top movers in the world, some of the most amazing movement thinkers, and people from fields that are related to movement as far afield as evolutionary theory, strength and conditioning, and everything in between. So if you're interested in movement, please stick around. And if you like our work and want to support it, please consider supporting us on Patreon, because this podcast is completely listener supported. We don't want to take any advertising. We don't want to interrupt your experience of watching the show. So what really helps us get the best thinkers on, have the time to put these together, have the best quality for you guys as far as audio and video is your support. So please consider supporting us and enjoy the rest of the show. Hello, and welcome back to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. Our guest today is Thomas Couetdic. Thomas is one of the really very early adopters of parkour before it was really known outside of small communities in France. He got the chance to train directly with David Bell and with other members of the early Trasseurs group. He's a guy who's been really well respected in the parkour community as a teacher for a long time. He's not well known through his social media presence and things like that, but people who know about the parkour community know that this is one of the best tracers that we've had in the world. He was kind enough to talk to me about parkour philosophy. So this is a conversation that I originally set up just to have between the two of us. But as I was talking to him, I noticed that kind of some of the stuff we talk about seemed like it would work on a podcast. So I decided to record it. I kept more of a conversational tone. This is really specifically an interview that I'm doing with him so that I can get insight into the origins of parkour philosophy and what that philosophy meant. So I conducted this conversation a little bit differently than I would a conversation that was more specifically to be an interview. But I thought it was still interesting enough that that it'd be really rewarding. And I think perhaps that kind of relaxed atmosphere where we're really just sharing with each other is going to be interesting to you guys. And we get deep into the origins of parkour and what it can give to you and how it has changed and evolved as it's spread, and maybe how we can return it to the most powerful version of itself that existed at its roots. So I think it's a really interesting conversation. I'm really excited to have Thomas on the podcast. And without further ado, enjoy. Thomas Couetdic. So you were telling me that you started training when you were 17 years old. And
yes.
You trained basically for 10 years really intensively in parkour. And then you kind of hit this crisis period where you lost your motivation.
Yeah.
And you're saying you went to the Pyrenees and just were kind of just training physically there.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you came out of that and ended up applying for the Army, and you're saying you qualified for Special Forces. So tell us, did you end up going into Special Forces?
Yeah, I started the training there. I spent almost a year there going through training. And just before the end of the training, I just decided, like, this is not what I want. You know, every time I was thinking, like realizing that this was becoming a reality, that I would be soon sent out to kill people and do stuff, you know, I felt like this is not me. This is not what I want to do. I love the whole like action thing, learning to use a gun and learning tactics and stealth training and all that. I really love it, but like I don't want to hurt people, you know. What's at the beginning was like I felt like it was going to be an adventure, and then as it became more and more real, I felt like I don't want to take that path, you know. It's something really serious, and it's not an adventure anymore, you know. So I decided to stop. And yeah, but it was a really good experience, and I realized how close the mindset there is to parkour, because the parkour mindset came from the Army, at least in part, and I could, like, when I was there, I could really see the similarities. I haven't seen any other thing that was so similar to the parkour mindset than the special forces. It was really like surprising how close it is.
So what would you say was really similar about it?
The whole like mindset of just be ready all the time, and don't like yeah, be ready, but in every sense of the word, of not just with obstacles but with everything that makes you uncomfortable. uh, don't think, okay, this is just out of bounds, I'm not going to train this aspect of thing because it makes me scared, or it makes me like just uncomfortable in a way that I don't like it, no, just be ready all the time, because you never know when stuff's going to happen, you have to be ready. And this mindset that I got from training with David especially, but also from the other guys, um, it was really the same in the army. Like there's no, you don't come up with excuses, like if you feel uncomfortable because, I don't know, you're marching all night and you start to be tired, or your feet hurt or something like this, you just learn to not even verbalize it, as everyone's going through the same stuff, and that's the way it is. And it starts to build your your mind, your strength of mind, because you start accepting all this as being normal, like this casual discomfort of, I'm too hot, I'm too cold, my boots hurt, or whatever it is, I'm hungry, or I want to sleep, or I don't want to be outside right now, or all this stuff, just because you're forcing yourself through it all the time and not finding excuses, and you just learn to see it as normal. Discomfort becomes normal, and so it's not really discomfort anymore, not the way it wasn't, like, at the beginning.
Yeah.
And this is very similar to what I experienced by training with David and the others. There was this same approach of, like, don't find excuses, just find solutions. You feel uncomfortable, it doesn't matter, it's part of it, it's part of the experience, just work with it, don't try to shy away from it.
Yeah.
And
I was talking to Stefan about that. I interviewed him, and he was talking. Well, he talked about this in a few of his blog posts about, with David, if you said that you could do something, you had to do it.
yeah, exactly. This thing of, like, don't pretend, there's no pretending. You say you can do something, you say you want to do something, then do it, otherwise just shut your mouth, don't say anything. Like, it's a mix of humility um, and at the same time being honest. Like, if you know you can do something, then go ahead, say it, like, be proud of it, be happy about it, but just don't pretend. That's how you get stronger, by being honest with yourself. Others, yeah, but with yourself most of all.
That's actually one of the things that I find most profound about parkour is it's a profoundly honest process, right?
Yeah.
It's about teaching you to recognize what you're really capable of, and to not
Mm-hmm.
lie to yourself. And I think, like, I have a very strong martial arts background, but I think it's much easier to lie to yourself in martial arts because you so rarely get the opportunity to go 100%. Right?
Yeah.
You can't test yourself fully. You're always holding yourself back to not hurt yourself, to not hurt your training partners.
Yeah.
You can test yourself fully against the obstacles, and you can set up consequences that are really, really profound, but do it in a way where you know that you can accomplish it. And if you don't, then you really get a lesson in not lying to yourself through parkour.
Yeah. 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 I guess it's very similar in that aspect. Yeah.
So David had a military background as well. Did he spend some time in the military?
A little bit. Yeah. He didn't stay that long. I think he deserted at some point, because I think it was back in the time when, like, every person in France, like every man, had to go to do this military service thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so he stayed for a while and then deserted, and I can't exactly remember where he went after that, but maybe that's when he went to India for some time, but I'm not sure. But yeah, he did have some military experience.
And then, of course, his father Raymond was in the military firefighters.
Yeah.
That background.
Yeah.
So then, how did you transition into becoming a firefighter?
It's always something that tempted me for a long time, because I like this idea of like using your skills to like apply them to something that's actually really useful, really like
Yeah.
benefiting others, not just you. And yeah, after I left the army, it kind of made sense to move on to that. I didn't have anything else that I wanted to really do, and this just felt like the right thing because it was like kind of similar to the army spirit, but at the same time without the killing aspect.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, it felt right to do that.
It's interesting. Your name came up recently in one of the threads that I was talking about because people were talking about the idea of forgive me, I pronounced this incorrectly, but être fort pour être utile.
Être fort pour être utile.
Yeah. Be strong to be useful, which
Yeah.
Is this so let me ask you this, because my understanding is that ethos, that slogan is from Méthode Naturelle.
Yeah.
And that wasn't actually something that was talked about in the early generations of the parkour community. It was something that came on later as people became aware of Méthode Naturelle, at least that particular wording. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But I know that a lot of people in the parkour community became very inspired by that idea. And it's interesting because I feel like one thing that probably a lot of us played with was becoming firefighters. I know that I did it as well, or thought about it. Chris Rowett is a firefighter too, right, Blaine?
Yeah, in London. Yeah.
And so it has this obvious place where you can take all that physicality you've developed and you can make it relevant and useful in your life.
Yeah.
And how has that fulfilled that desire that you've had being a firefighter? Has it given you that outlet, and do you feel like all that training is benefiting the world the way that you would like it to?
I'd like to say yes, but I feel that no. Maybe because where I live, I mean, it's a small place and stuff happens, but it's not like being in Paris where you have these crazy things going on all the time. So maybe for that reason, but also, I don't know. I just like when I was doing parkour, I was always imagining I was in some crazy situation, like I need to save my life right now, from some building that was collapsing or whatever it was. And so I just got used to these crazy situations and when you're a firefighter, sometimes you'll get situations that are really intense, but most of the time it's not. So I guess maybe that's why I trained in the first place. I just wanted to feel like I was in control and, in challenging situations. And maybe now, maybe I am in control and that's why they don't feel that challenging. I don't know. It's something I think about. I don't know. But
That's the way it's supposed to be.
what? Sorry?
I think that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I guess so. But also maybe I'm just delusional. Maybe I just think I'm in control. I'm just not facing the real situations I should be facing.
Perhaps. I know what comes to mind for me is I've spoken a lot with one of my self-defense teachers, Rory Miller, and he worked for 10 or 15 years in correctional facilities. So, by far, all of his injuries happened in training, and pretty much, the most intense experiences as far as the way you're pushing yourself happens in training. And then if you're really prepared right and you've really done it for a long time, action usually feels routine.
Yeah.
You recognize what needs to be done and you're doing it and you're just acting professionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's this, I don't know if you have this in English, but in French, especially in the army, you hear a lot. They say, entraînement difficile, guerre facile, hard training, easy war.
Yeah.
It's the kind of, yeah, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things that are attributed to David Bell that I don't know if he actually said, but one of them that I've heard is, train while crying and you will win while laughing. If that's the thing he actually said.
I've never done that ever, no, but maybe.
I've first seen it attributed to him. There's so much mystery around those early days, especially for us English speakers, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the big reason I wanted to talk to you is I'm in this process of articulating the philosophy behind Evolve Move Play and kind of the inspirations behind all of that. And people who came up in the early generation of parkour on the international scene talked a lot about parkour philosophy and the idea that parkour was not a set of techniques. It wasn't a bunch of specific skills. It was actually a philosophy that underlie it. But I always felt like the philosophy that people talked about was incoherent, right? It didn't make any sense. Like getting from point A to point B as fast as possible bore like zero resemblance to the way that people actually trained.
Yeah.
And over the years, the model that I've had in my head is that there is a philosophy in parkour, but it was mostly acted out. It wasn't really articulated. It's not like people sat down and went through a formal philosophical process of creating this philosophy. They acted it out and then they tried to describe it, and they weren't necessarily really articulate. Like most of the guys who started it, in my understanding, don't come from super educated backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes sense that it was a little garbled. And then you had the problem that, for most of the world that didn't speak French, we were getting a very, very limited kind of understanding of what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have my own kind of idea of what I think it was, but I want to ask you, like, when you were practicing, did you feel like you had a really articulated idea of what you were doing? Could you have written out an essay saying what parkour philosophy was and felt satisfied with it?
Yeah. So, I didn't have a really like precise idea in my mind, but I knew it, like in general, I just wanted to be strong. And I think to feel strong, and parkour just felt like it was the perfect thing for this. I think the guys like David and all that, they came from the same mindset of we want to get stronger. How do we get stronger? At first, parkour wasn't even about jumping around. It wasn't even about movement. It was challenges. It was like fighting and stuff like this, like let's fight together. Let's get stronger like this, and then it started to become about challenges and like, do you think you can jump to that? Or do you think you can grab this branch or whatever? And little by little, it became about jumping. And then that's when the world caught on and saw, oh, there's this thing about jumping that people do, but it wasn't that, the mindset wasn't about the jumping. It was about getting strong. And when I met the guys in Nice, before parkour became this big thing, that's the mindset I discovered. And I've like, on that first day I met them, I realized, wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for. This thing of like challenging yourself and just being honest with yourself and facing real situations and like life and death kind of thing. Like if you mess up, then you can die, you can get really hurt. There's no protection, there's no safety. You have, it's like, it's reality, it's a real thing. And it felt like it was like answering the questions I was trying to answer. It felt like the right thing for me.
Interesting. Have you ever seen the movie Fight Club?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was 19 years old when I saw the movie Fight Club, and it probably no other film has ever kind of struck me with the same kind of like that says something to me about the way that I'm experiencing the world.
Yeah.
It seemed really profound. And then I remember a few years later, I went back to it after I'd started training parkour, and it felt like it wasn't nearly as profound to me anymore, because the the question that was asked in Fight Club, I'd actually found the answer to in parkour, which was this idea that we needed a way to challenge ourselves and to grow strong, basically.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It seems like there's this desire that you're describing to just confront something so that you can test yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was essentially the ethos. So years ago, when I first started teaching, I wanted to have a definition of parkour that that I could build my teaching method off of. And so I initially wrote that, the common definition, the Wikipedia definition that sort of the community had come upon was this, like, parkour is the art of getting from point A to point B as fast as possible, which is ridiculous, because you could just walk or run along, it wasn't what we were practicing. So what I wrote was, parkour is the discipline of developing the ability to overcome obstacles effectively. And then a few years later, I put on, parkour is the art of developing the ability to overcome obstacles effectively, and of developing the self through overcoming obstacles. And when Stun It Fun came out here to teach, I was like, I think I got it switched. It wasn't the overcoming obstacles that should be the beginning. It was the developing the self that should be the beginning. The obstacles just serve the cultivation of the self.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's go back for a second. A little scatter here. You were kind of in the third generation of parkour practitioners, correct?
Yeah,
Like
I
third
guess so.
French generation.
Yeah. I was so there was David and that group at the beginning. Then there was Stefan and his brother and a few others. And I arrived I think maybe a couple of years after Stefan's brother Johan. So I don't know how long Stefan had been training before that. Maybe also a couple of years. So I don't know. Maybe I arrived 4 years after Stefan or something like this.
Okay. I think I read in a book that there was kind of a younger crew of people who were training. It was like you and Johan, who weren't training so much with David and Stefan, but training mostly on your own using the method.
Yeah. I didn't live in Lys, so I had to come over by train, or sometimes I cycled to Lys. And the first guys who introduced me to parkour when I was there were Johan and Sébastien Goudot, and another guy called Michael Ramdani. And they were the three guys I was like training with all the time. Like, they're the guys who introduced me to it, and they were the ones I was in contact with, and they would like give me some training programs that I could do when I was back home. And so sometimes I would cross path with David or Stefan or the others, but I didn't really train with them back then.
And then did you get to a point where you were training with them regularly?
Yeah, more regularly. Yeah, I remember that it was around the time that David was starting to have like international projects of we did just before the Madagascar thing,
Okay.
And I don't remember how it happened, but we ended up doing one training session together and with the other guys around. And maybe for him it was like a trial thing, like to see what I was up to, and my approach and everything. And he seemed to be happy about it, so that's when he said like, we're gonna do this trip Madagascar if you want to join. And at that moment I started being part of the group. Like, there was nothing official, like he never said, okay, you're in the group now, but that's kind of how it happened.
So how long were you kind of training directly with that group?
Um, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say because it wasn't like a regular thing or anything. I was still not living in Nice. I never lived there, so I was still coming over like really often,
Mhm.
maybe twice a month or something like this. Um, but uh, but yeah, it was kind of random, you know. Sometimes I wouldn't train with David for a while, and then I would see him again because he's very unpredictable. So like, you can't really make plans with him.
Yeah.
So so yeah, it just kind of happened naturally, you know, sometimes. And so it's hard to say how long it lasted. Maybe if I don't know, a few years. I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, something like this.
And did you ever train extensively with the Yamakaze?
No, just a few times on during events. That's where I really started like talking with them and everything. But before that, I didn't really know them that much. Just saw them every now and again doing their stuff.
Yeah, I get the impression just a little bit that the Yamakaze approach was less specifically military oriented, and that's
Yeah,
more the influence of David and Raymond. Um,
yeah. Yeah, the Yamakasi first. There was this kind of conflict between David and the Yamakasi. So like, you could never hear really objective versions of things. You always had the version of the Yamakasi and the version of David. And
yeah,
because I was hanging around with David's group, then I always had their version.
yeah,
I've never been like really uh, kind of patriotic about
yeah, yeah.
which group I'm in or anything like this. You know, I just want to get stronger. So if I can learn from someone that's the enemy, then I'll learn from them. You know, there's things to learn from everyone. So that was kind of my approach. Um, but um, but yeah, when I was seeing the Yamakasi doing their thing, it was always more like the artistic aspect of things. And that was not at all my mindset. You know, that was not at all my approach. That's not what I was looking for at all, you know. So that's probably why I never completely connected with them, although I've done some training sessions with them since. And like, in terms of pushing themselves and things like this, and the group spirit and things like this, they're really good with that, and I can really relate to that. But most of the techniques and exercises that they do, it's just not my thing. So that's probably why I didn't spend that much time with them.
Yeah, yeah. I just asked because I think when we're trying to kind of get at what is the philosophy, where did it come from?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there was maybe something that was common to all of them, and then there was this little separation, um, and I'm curious uh, in trying to kind of articulate what the common thing was, or maybe what the separations were. Um, but let me so let me just go back and just ask again about
Yep.
the idea of, like, if I asked you now, like, after all these years, you said the time you spent in parkour was kind of the most profound changes that you made in yourself in your life. You're not sure that you'll ever be able
Yeah.
to find anything else that makes those type of changes in you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you were to articulate what was the core of what you're doing, what was the philosophy of what you're doing, what were you aimed at in that process? How would you say that now?
I think it was I think it was all about proving something to myself. You know, that was the I think that's where I drew my uh, my uh, my passion from, like my determination to just keep pushing harder and all that. I think it just came from that, because I didn't have any confidence when I got into parkour. I was like very shy and very I don't know, just didn't trust myself at all, you know. And I was like, I remember at some point, when about the time when I started parkour, like, I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'm not good at anything. I'm not gonna achieve anything, but at least I'm gonna try. You know, I'm gonna give it like a serious, honest try. I'm not gonna find excuses. I'm just gonna see how far I can get. You know, and like this, at least I'll know for sure that I can't do anything. You know, because I have tried. And that was the mindset that I started training with. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I trained, the more I realized that I was empowering myself. I was discovering that it's not that I was getting stronger, it's just I was discovering my strength, you know? Because I don't think strength is completely built. I think it's just discovered. You know, you realize your strength in situations. You know, you draw it from yourself. You don't just magically create it, yeah, out of thin air. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I guess the more I was pushing, the more I realized, okay, I can actually do things, and I'm actually worth something. I can achieve stuff. You know, and that just kept me going. You know, I just couldn't give up at that point. It was not even an option anymore, you know, because I was just realizing how good it was making me feel and how much it was making me discover about myself. So like giving up was absolutely not an option. It was impossible to give up.
Mm-hmm. So what does it mean to you to be strong? Like you like it's funny we use this word strong, but like the first thing that pops
Yeah,
in my mind is like, well, why not go power lift, right? Like you're going to be as
yeah,
purely strong in the sense of pure physical strength. It's kind of a word that's being used in a very loose way here.
yeah. And it is. I mean, it is a very general thing because you can be strong in so many ways. Um, I think for me, strength has a lot to do with what I was talking about earlier with discomfort in general. You know, finding your comfort in discomfort. You know, and whatever it is, whether physical or mental or anything, uh, it's like being in situations where you're not in your comfort zone and still being able to be productive in those situations, you know, still being able to do what you have to do. uh, that for me is the core of what strength is about. That's the kind of strength that I've been focusing on, I've been searching for, you know.
Yeah.
uh, it's not so much, I mean, physical strength of course counts, and it's also a product of this mindset. uh, but on its own, it's not what I would call strength. You know, if you can do 1,000 pull-ups, but I don't know, you don't want to go out in the rain to train because it's cold, or you know, or because you don't like to be wet, then there's no strength in that, you know. So yeah, I guess it's this combination. You need the physical strength, you also need the mental strength, and it's this combination of of um, of yeah, being comfortable in discomfort, and yeah, yeah. The I'm trying to think if there's a better way for me to explain it,
Yeah,
but
I
it's
think
really
there's a couple words that pop to mind. One is resilience, and
yeah.
then or even anti-fragility, right? What Nassim Taleb would call anti-fragility, and the other is
Hmm.
resourcefulness, right?
Yeah,
It's not simply having the ability to exert force, but recognizing and having skillfulness to achieve things. I'm
yeah.
reading a really great book you might like called Dexterity on Dexterity by or Dexterity and its Development by Nikolai Bernstein. But
Hmm.
he breaks down this idea. I think that what you're developing in parkour um, is more like dexterity, right? It's more like skillfulness. But he takes
Yeah.
all these different levels of it, and then he talks about the idea of like being adept and being resourceful. Um,
Hmm.
and I think it's very interesting to kind of look at it through these lenses. But yeah, I like to think about what are the words we're using, and how do we get really clear on this? Like what are we actually after? And I think it's interesting because one of my former students, who's one of the best athletes in a lot of ways that I've ever worked with. He's like won a bunch of parkour competitions. I can't get him to come train in the rain. So I'd say like most people who practice parkour now won't train in the rain. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
and it seems to me like a lot of that mindset that you're describing, uh, it doesn't characterize a lot of the parkour community anymore. Is that something you
Yeah.
also noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Though now I'm very disconnected from the parkour community in general. I have some friends, but they're like old school guys, so
Yeah.
I'm not really connected to the modern parkour community. But from what I see in videos and events going on and stuff like this, yeah, it looks like it's a completely different thing. There's still the jumping, there's still clearing obstacles and things like this, but not at all with the same quest, you know, that
Yeah.
that I had or that the other guys had.
Quest. I love that idea of the quest. You know, I think of, I almost think of parkour as and what I'm doing with EMP as a quest for meaning, right? To,
Hmm.
to be in a place where you're living a meaningful life through constructing your own character.
Yeah, yeah.
I sorry, we're talking about the community now. Well, I had this idea recently that I liked, which was in traditional Japanese martial arts. There's this distinction between Jutsu and Do. Are you familiar with
Hmm.
this?
Is though like about the method, the mindset behind the
Yeah.
practice.
So jutsu literally means like technique or craft. So you can have a
Hmm.
jutsu of like carpentry. You can have a jutsu
Yeah,
of whatever. And most of the Japanese martial arts, in some sense, they start as jutsu because they were used by professional soldiers, right? So
yeah,
jujitsu is is um is a means that was trained to soldiers to overcome an armed opponent when they had lost their own weapon. And that
yeah.
all these grappling techniques, they were really specific in their application. But then all of a sudden you didn't have samurai fighting all the time, so you didn't have a purpose for people to really train this. That's obvious, right? Like firefighting techniques, the stuff that you learn in firefighting, um, you learn it specifically because you're going to go use it, right?
Hmm.
Same in special forces. But most people
Yeah.
who do parkour, they're not really learning. They don't have a direct endpoint, right? Here's how I make money, here's how I help people, here's how I do something with this, here's how I make the world better with this. We don't have an endpoint like that. That's obvious.
Yeah.
um, you know, we can't make a couch with our
Yeah.
skills. So then the same thing happened with the Japanese martial arts, where they, you know, they no longer were directly relevant in the same way, but people found that they did something for them. They helped them become something through practicing them. And then they
Hmm.
started focusing on that. And that's when you had this movement from jujitsu to judo, from aikijitsu to aikido. And do means way. It's the same word as Tao, right? Like the Tao Te
Yeah.
Ching. And so the idea was that the the movement practices uh, were ways of cultivating the self. And it seems to me that that what happened with parkour was it started as a do, right? It was
Hmm.
you you guys weren't training because you were saying, okay, I'm going to go use this to be a firefighter, I'm going to go use this to do this. You were training because it changed who you were in a way that
Yeah.
was meaningful to you.
Yeah.
um, and the specific meaning that was attached to that you were aimed at was, in some degree, it was I think it seems to me that part of that came really specifically from the struggles of the community that parkour came out of, right? Because so many of these kids were immigrant kids from lower income, from broken families, and they had some trauma that they were trying to process through this, right?
Yeah.
They had this need to get something different from what to get outside of the little cultural sphere they were in. Um, but then when the rest of the world saw it, we couldn't see the dough inside the thing. We could only see
Yeah.
the technique. And so that as it was adopted widely, the techniques have been taken and you know amplified and
Yeah.
elaborated all over the
Yeah.
world. But it seems to me that the underlying philosophy has been um, not it hasn't had the same kind of expansion, and it hasn't had much penetration into large segments of the community.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very good analogy with parkour. Definitely, it's exactly that.
Yeah. So I mean, as a practitioner in those old days, is that something you'd like to see? You know, would it be valuable to you to see that the way of parkour was being spread and being understood? I'm just curious.
Um, I'd like it for sure, but I've never been too focused on that because when I got into parkour, like no one introduced me to it right away. It was me who decided, okay, I want to get into this. I want to research it. I want to know the guys. I want to discover how they train, what their mindset is. And I went to see them, and it was really hard to get in touch with them because there was nothing on the internet. It was impossible to find them. And I did some knew them and things like this, and finally managed to get in touch with them. Um, and and so I went to search for it. It didn't come to me. I went to search for it.
Yeah.
And and if I didn't have uh, already this mindset in me, I wouldn't have done all that. I wouldn't have like try to find them, and then when I found them, I wouldn't kept on going and seeing them and trying to ask for more training all the time, because they only gave to me if I was giving back. If I was taking in what they were giving and applying it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have lost a minute with me. Um, and so I kind of like, maybe I'm wrong, but I kind of feel like it should stay like this, that if people want to find this approach, then they can just find people who've trained like this and learn from them. And if they don't do this, then we shouldn't go to them to give it to them, because that kind of defeats the purpose. That shouldn't be like this. They should come to ask for it.
Hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but I mean, to me it does. To me, that's been my approach. And that's why maybe I don't really do much to perpetuate the spirit. Although if people come to me, then I'm ready to give a lot. Like there's a girl here. There's no money involved or anything like this. She just comes and trains, and as long as she's interested, I'll keep teaching her. That's not a problem. And I prefer this kind of approach rather than going to people and trying to promote something. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, I understand the choice that you made. I wonder to what degree it can happen the way that it happened for you now. Now that it's like when you found it, you didn't have Instagram, right? You didn't have YouTube. The kind of the ecology that allowed this group of young people to find and pursue this sport is very different now, because for one thing, parkour the do now has to compete with parkour the jutsu, right? Like people don't feel the sense that this is something mysterious that they have to go find, a teacher with a like a deep way, because they can just go to Instagram and see thousands of clips of it.
Yeah, yeah,
So for me, my answer is more to say, how can we articulate this in such a way that that the people who are seeking it can really recognize it and start practicing the principles, and recognize that the value in finding the real teachers,
yeah.
right? So I've been, as you know, kind of really digging into this, and I want to break down for you my idea of what I think this philosophy was about, and see how it hits home for you. Tested against somebody who knows what it was about in the beginning. So I was thinking, I've been writing a lot about this, but when I first discovered parkour, right, I saw one of David's videos, En avance toujours, right?
Yeah.
And I was completely hooked. It just utterly inspired me. And I'd grown up as a kid in the woods with lots of opportunities to run and jump and climb. And, and so I was intimidated to do it, but I had a friend who kind of encouraged me and we started training. And it was the combination of like becoming really close friends with this guy. And then we were training 2 or 3 days a week. And in the beginning, it was really playful. We weren't, we didn't know anything. We weren't doing lots of conditioning. Like we both trained gymnastics. So we did conditioning and gymnastics, but we didn't go out and do push-ups or anything. We just did flips off stuff and jumped around and climbed and explored our environment. And it was really fun. It was extremely rewarding. And then I remember there was a definition of parkour that was released through Pawa.ru, supposedly by David, maybe not. And that was the idea that parkour was about efficiently getting from one point to another. That was the first time that we heard that, and that flips weren't part of parkour. I remember telling Dane that, and he's like, "Wait, is that the people who can't flip? Is that what they say?" But for whatever reason, it was like the idea that there was something serious about it and that there was a philosophy behind it was meaningful to me. And I wanted to try to act it out, and I wanted to try to engage with it. And so I pushed myself on that path of kind of like training to be able to overcome things really effectively. And at that time, there was this big controversy over whether competitions would come into parkour. And what I saw was that basically like everyone was competing to put out videos that looked good. Right. And they were competing by doing flips and they're competing by doing this other stuff. And it was like, if the idea of the discipline, as I understood at the time, was really about being able to overcome things effectively, then how could we test that better than setting up competitions where we ran through it?
Yeah.
So I walked down that path and and then it was like, I'd always been inspired by professional athletes. And so I started thinking about my training like a professional athlete. I wanted to kind of set out goals and accomplish things in the way that you'd prepare yourself and win competitions. And I went through a phase of that, and I wasn't super successful, but I was somewhat successful. And then I ended up really falling in love with moving around in the trees, and I couldn't.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I couldn't motivate myself to go into the gym to train to be in a competition, because all the competitions were in gyms, and for me, parkour was always about being outside, and I was always attracted to taking myself into nature. I didn't want to even be in the city. I wanted to be in nature from the very beginning, really, or about a year into my practice, and so I had these beautiful trees that I had found, and it was like I could always think, well, I could go in and train to compete, or I could go train in these trees, and I always ended up choosing training the trees. So I gave up my goals and I just followed my bliss, basically. And so it was like play, professional, and then back to play in a way. But there was something very philosophical. I was thinking a lot about what I was doing and about what play meant and why we played. But play ended up, my brand is called Evolve Move Play. It was never the idea that only play is what you need, but it was something that people really didn't understand. And then but I went really deep into just not having any form in my training. And that ended up not being satisfying either. And I started getting injured. And so then I went back to this idea of like having more discipline. It was a combination of the playfulness and the exploration, but also the discipline. And I started really articulating the idea that ultimately the thing that we could sustain our practice and keep us going over the long run was the idea of cultivating the self, right? I heard this saying that comes out of mountaineering. It's not what the man does to the mountain, it's what the mountain does to the man, right? That's what I felt about parkour. It was like, it's not the jump, it's what the jump does to you. And if you only make it about the jump, if it's only about the jump, then you get to train for a few years, because you're not going to be able to do the biggest jumps ever when you're 50. And even if you're great today, what's great for you today is going to be like easy for kids 10 years from now. And
exactly.
and so I was like, okay, well, if it's about self-cultivation, well, what does that mean? And that was around the time that I ran into Jordan Peterson's ideas, and it took me a
Mm-hmm.
really long time to digest what he was talking about. But it seemed like to me, ultimately, what he had ended up saying was like perfectly congruent with what I felt like I now understood about what you guys were doing in the beginning of that process and what I had been trying to do. So what that was, as far as I could tell, is basically the idea that we need to confront things in order to grow. And he talks about this idea of the archetypal hero. The world is composed of uh, of chaos, undifferentiated potential, and order. The things that we understand and that work, that function, and a hero is someone who voluntarily confronts chaos and brings something valuable out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's why it's the dragon, chaos, that guards the gold. That's the thing of value. And essentially, every time that we were doing a jump, we were acting out that, like you said, it's a quest. Every jump is like a quest where you're going and you're seeing something that is it's unformed potential because you don't know it, you haven't done it yet, and it's
Yeah.
scary, and
Yeah.
it creates anxiety, and you have to process it, and you have to learn about yourself more deeply. And then you jump, and it's like, for me, it was like the gold that we're creating is our own character, right? It's knowing that we're strong. It's having a process for overcoming things. And I had this insight actually just yesterday that there's two aspects of this, because the heroic archetype, as Peterson talks about, is 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 not only the person who confronts chaos and brings good order out of it. It's actually also the person who confronts tyrannical order and brings good chaos into it, because um, because chaos is overwhelming, but it's where everything new comes out of. And
Yeah.
order is comforting, but it's also stultifying, right? It also
Yeah.
is tyrannical and oppressive. And and so there's the myth of the dragon slayer, but there's also the myth of the person who brings the water back to the parched kingdom, right? The waters represent chaos. And so I had this realization that in some sense parkour is like a reconceptualization of the city, and then also nature as a place where you could find these new chaotic potentials, right? That we exist in this world where where all of the paths have been set for us, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's so much order in the way that we've set out our cities that there's
Yeah.
no stressors to make our bodies strong.
Yeah.
And so what you happened with parkour is kids said, I need to be strong. I need to be strong. And walking down the sidewalk is not making me strong. It's not allowing me to test my character. It's not allowing me to have these little quests and confrontations.
Yeah.
So I'm going to reimagine the city as a place where I can do that. And I'm going to see these
Yeah.
new potentials. And so it's this really cool aspect of how we bring these things into it and how we use that as a self-cultivation practice. And so I guess if I was to try to say that succinctly, the basic idea is, first of all, we want to live a meaningful life, right? And we
Yeah.
derive meaning from proactively doing things, by acting things out. And parkour allows us to examine that process of how we confront something new, um, and how we do something creative in an incredibly concrete way. And
Yeah.
so this idea that Peterson's talking about of like, clean your room, take responsibility for yourself, bear your cross, confront the dragons, and become someone you would admire. Um, that to me is acted out physically. It's what was being acted out physically by the early generation of parkour, and to some degree by all of us who've done it. So that's my claim, and so I want to make sure that guys who actually experienced it at the beginning, I'm not missing something.
Well, yeah. I mean, as you were um, as you were explaining this, I like really recognized the what's the word, the approach behind Paco as being something like that, because um, we all come, like me and David and all these people, we all grew in cities.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, kind of disconnected from any area where we could be challenged, or we could be we could learn to be mindful, you know, about what's going on, about our surroundings, about things that can happen. Um, but it's at the same time we were not happy with that. Uh, Whether because it's boring or because we have this dream of adventure or whatever it is, we felt we needed more. So I guess, yeah, it's kind of what you're saying, of like bringing that chaos back into something that where it's kind of lost, you know, and designed for that. Our bodies, our minds. I mean, we've gone through thousands of years of evolution and going through situations where everything could be life and death at any time, you know, and just being safe all the time is something that's very recent for human beings. And so I think we're, even though we've grown up in something like this, in comfort, uh, our bodies, our minds are not completely tuned for that. You know, we still have our like primitive instincts and desires and aspirations. You know, so I guess it stems a little bit from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you are a living thing, you always have to have something that pushes against you, because it's the only way you grow strong.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I mentioned Rory Miller earlier. He says something like, he says, there's no growth without friction.
Yeah,
Right. So if we've smoothed all the paths for ourselves in our lives so much, we have to go find that friction somewhere. We have to go find the place where we can push ourselves enough to grow. Yeah, that I guess that for me, I would sort of sum it up as, you know, parkour in some sense is a quest for meaning. It's a quest to enter a meaningful life, and that's why I like Fight Club as an analogy, right? Uh,
yeah,
when the narrator sits down with Tyler Durden, and Tyler Durden tells him, you know, we work jobs that we hate to make to buy things that we don't need to impress people we don't like.
yeah,
It's like the classic expression of this idea that's so common in modern life, that we feel that our lives are meaningless, that our actions are disconnected, that we're disconnected from other people, from ourselves, from nature, um, and that's really intolerable, as great as modern life is in many ways, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, and that what we're pursuing through parkour is to enter into this place of where our actions are meaningful and where we grow as human beings through them.
Yeah,
And so it's like
yeah,
it's a quest for meaning through the cultivation of character by challenging
yeah,
yourself.
yeah,
That's to me the philosophy of parkour. Um, and it sounds like I'm not too far off.
yeah, absolutely. I completely recognize Paco in what you're saying, and I think also Paco is so good at helping people with this because when you're training outside, you can't really completely decide on what you're gonna face. You know, like the obstacles and everything. It's there, and you adapt to it. Kind of like
Mhm.
someone has to climb a mountain. You know, whatever it throws at you, that's what you have to deal with. And you can't move a tree to make it closer so it's easier or anything like this. Like the opposite of what you do in a gym. And I think all these things like this that you can't have complete control over, but that you have to adapt to, are are the best in making you go out of your comfort zone, getting better, getting stronger, um, and um, and finding that friction that you were talking about, you know, for growth.
Yeah, absolutely. So if that's what it's all about, my question for you then is, you say it's really changed your life, and it changed you
Yeah,
in profound ways, but also you say that you don't feel the need for it anymore so much. You know, you enjoy to train, but it's not changing you the way that it was it before.
Yeah, but that's just in regards of with parkour, but I still feel that I have this need in my life to push myself in that way, you know, and to learn more about myself. But it's just that I don't get it from parkour anymore, I guess. I mean, there's a big aspect of my life that's about traveling. I've traveled a lot and gone on like many adventures, cycling and things like this, you know, throughout the world. And so there's I get it through this as well, you know, and a little bit through climbing, not as much as I was saying. But also, I think the more you learn about yourself, the more the progress will be in the details, you know. And now, like before, I was thinking, okay, I need to push myself, I need to get stronger, so I'm gonna find jumps, you know, difficult jumps to do. Like that was the approach. And now maybe it's gonna be something completely different. Maybe it's gonna be more about um, I don't know, just like talking in public if I'm afraid of it or things like this, things that I wouldn't even have thought about in the past, you know, but that now I realize, okay, it's so obvious. I should be strong at this as well. You know, it's not just about like the whole adventure thing of doing jumps and like crazy death defying stuff, you know.
Yeah.
It's also about the little things, you know. And the more you learn about yourself, the more you know yourself in detail, and so the more you can work on these little details, you know. And once you've explored the general areas that you need to work on, then you can start working on the smaller things. And so they might be less obvious to other people, but but nevertheless, like it's like when you paint something, you know, you have to make the general picture, but then at the end you fill in the little details, and those little details, although on their own they seem very insignificant. So I feel like I'm in this aspect of things now, you know. It's not so much about the big thing, it's more about the little details. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. It's so there's so the first question, you know, I may have asked is like, well, what is parkour all about? And then if I've articulated that it's this about idea of cultivating the self, then the
Yeah,
question is, clearly it serves some of us some of the time, right? Like, you know,
yeah,
many of us can say that it was really profound, but are we actually utilizing it to that end as well as it could be utilized? Is my question. And are there things that we can do to make it better? Like, you know, people, I meet lots of young men who say that I was not confident when I started parkour, and now I'm confident, but they still don't know how to ask a girl out,
yeah,
right? And that was
yeah,
probably the biggest reason that they wanted to be confident. But now they're just having so much fun jumping because it makes them feel good that they're not
yeah,
actually addressing the original problem that they had.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think that there's a trap within physical practices of once you feel comfortable and competent and like you can overcome something in one place, it can actually like lead you away from confronting things in other places. And you have to take
yeah,
on not just the physical practice, but you have to take on the mindset that you're trying to take those lessons from that practice into the rest of your life.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always, I've always tried to push myself in those ways. Like the example of asking a girl out, the challenge of having to like talk with a girl or something like this, get a smile, you get a point if you get a smile, and if you get a phone number, you get 3 points or something like this, you know. Uh, it was, I think it was stemming from this kind of realization that you're not just strong by, like, I mean, it's not, yeah, not just about strength, but I mean, you're that, yeah, that you can easily lose track of why you're doing what you're doing, why you're doing it in the first place, like what void are you trying to fill, you know. Um, and I guess, I mean, sorry, I'm trying to formulate in my mind at the same time as I'm saying it, so it's not maybe sounding very clear, but um, it's so easy to just lose track of why you're doing it in the first place. But sometimes we don't even know exactly why we're doing it in the first place. So that maybe that's also why we lose track of it. We're just I don't know. Like I'm afraid to talk to girls, therefore I'm gonna go climb a mountain. You know, it's that kind of thing. It's silly when you say it out loud like this, but that's often what we do. You know, uh, we just move what we want to work on to another thing that has nothing to do with it. You know.
That can be
So
really
yeah,
helpful, or it can be
what?
very misleading.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I heard Jordan Peterson said something I really like. He said that the most profound way of procrastinating, the really like most devilish way of procrastinating, is to do the second most important thing on your list.
Yeah.
You're always putting
Yeah.
off. You're always putting off the most important thing, but you're not putting it off to just do nothing. You're doing something that seems useful. So you get to delude
Yeah.
yourself that you're doing what you need to do, but you're avoiding the things that you most need to do.
Yeah. 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 Definitely, I agree.
And so I just wanted to bring that up at the end of the conversation here because I think that that is really useful for people to understand this broader perspective on it. And that's something that I'm right now. I'm having these conversations with John Vervaeke from the University of Toronto about these kind of broader wisdom traditions. But I see parkour and EMP as kind of ideally existing within a kind of ecology of practices that meditation, contemplation, and recognizing, maybe it is public speaking, maybe it's like doing some improvisational work, but always looking at it as like, this is a place to build the way in which you engage with self-cultivation, but it's about
Yeah.
the self-cultivation in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So unfortunately, the line keeps breaking up. So we should probably. I think that's a good a place to stop as any. But
Yeah.
do you have any last comments you want to share with the audience about the early days of parkour and how what you've learned?
Um, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things I could talk about because I didn't really get into the why I got into travels, because I think to me it was very related to my quest with parkour. You
Yeah.
know, I started like expanding into like getting into the real world and not just being in the realm of parkour, but being in the world and maybe applying what I learned through parkour in the world. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess that's why I got into those travels, into like adventure
Yeah.
traveling. Um, so yeah, it's a big aspect that I could easily talk about for hours, you know. But it goes back to what you were saying about don't lose track of while you're doing things. What, like, if your mission, if your goal is to be a stronger person, then don't just specialize in something. Don't just get strong at something. You might get the illusion that you're strong, but you're just strong at one thing. You're just good at one thing. You know, you're specialized. And to me, that's not really strength. I guess you, like, either you're strong or you're not strong. You can't just like be specifically strong. That's, to me, that's not my definition of strength. You know?
Yeah. I like the word virtue. Virtue, right? Virtue is you want to cultivate a virtuous character in a broad sense. Um, So, well, maybe we can have that conversation at a future time. How traveling relates with parkour as a way to cultivate yourself. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for giving me a time and chatting.
You're welcome.
Is there anything we should promote for you, social media or whatever? You're kind of a quiet guy, just being a
Yeah.
firefighter in Mountain, but
In the forest, that's it.
yeah. Well, I hope I get a chance to come and train with you and experience it side by side one of these days.
And you're always welcome here. Yeah, thanks for what you're doing. You're really passionate about what you're doing, and I really, really appreciate that. I really like it.
Awesome. It's really, as someone who comes from the younger community from the other side of the world, to try to speak for that is
Yeah.
It's important that I make sure that it's really congruent with what you guys are about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's appreciated. I wish everyone could have that kind of approach, not just with parkour, but with everything, you know, just questions and searching, like genuine questions, not just staying in their little field, but really trying to open up to other things. I really like that. That's really cool.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll talk again soon. Talk to you later.
Yep.
Bye.
Take care, man. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Evolve Move Play podcast. If you want to support what we're doing, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notifications button so you know what's coming up. And of course, the biggest support you can give is to become a Patreon supporter. This is what's going to allow us to grow this platform more than anything else. So this is entirely listener supported, and we really appreciate your support. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.